Hello, so in this video I've just made two videos in a row, but I'm going to do another one because I've sort of been thinking about this a little bit. I ended up I watched a lecture on logic by this lady called, I think, Marianne. That might be a name, that might not, I'm sorry if it's not. But she works at Oxford University, and the lecture I was watching was on logic, and a part of the lecture, I don't know why, this part stuck so much, but it did. It was about Kant and Deontic logic and how he found that interesting. So I'm going to start by explaining what Deontic logic is. Now, I'm not going to be able to give a comparison in the sense that I can give the formal names of other types of logic, but I will be able to give an example of an argument and then compare it to Deontic logic and why and say why Kant found Deontic logic more interesting, or he was I guess more intrigued by it than any other type of logic. So I'll start off by saying Kant was almost completely a deontologist. His theory is debatably slightly teleological because he talks about the summum bonum, which is an ultimate good that we can reach in the afterlife. So although we're doing things for the action and motive and for the although we're doing actions because they're good in themselves or intrinsically good in this life, we have to do them for that reason. There's actually an ulterior end which we'll reach in the afterlife, perhaps. And I don't think we could reach the summum bonum in this life. I'm not sure. But yeah, so I'll give an example of deontic logic. So you only necessarily need maybe a premise and a conclusion. So premise one would be lying is wrong, and then conclusion from that, therefore you ought not to lie. Kant said this was interesting because you didn't need a desire. So for any other sort of logic to make sense, maybe I'm generalising a little bit too much there because I don't have a lot of knowledge on the subject, but a lot of other types of logic, you need a desire, otherwise it doesn't really make sense. So for example, I need to be at London by 12 o'clock. That's premise one. Premise two, in order to get to London by 12 o'clock, I need to get the 11 o'clock train. Conclusion, therefore, I should get the 11 o'clock train. Now, that wouldn't make sense if we just had the last two premises. If I just said if we just take away the first premise, which is the desire, which is I want or need to get to London by 12 o'clock. If we just had premise one as if you want to get to London by 12 o'clock, you should get the 11 o'clock train. Conclusion, therefore you should get the 11 o'clock train. You can't definitively derive that conclusion because you're lacking the piece of information that suggests that you want to get to London by 12 o'clock. Now, Kant said with deontic logic, you don't need that desire. You just, if something is intrinsically wrong, then you just ought not to do it. And that's that. That's a reason not to do it. The fact that something is wrong is a reason not to do it. But then that suggests, well, how does Kant get from the idea that something is wrong? How does Kant know that something is intrinsically wrong and that is a reason not to do it? And I think that's sort of confusing because obviously, well, he uses the categorical imperative as a means of figuring out how to make ethical decisions. So, and he believes that this is almost innate to the universe, or it's completely objective. It's not necessarily a subjective type of thing. It's something that applies universally to everyone. Although I'm not quite sure what Kant means by objectivity. Like, does he mean that it exists outside of the human experience? So, nominally, is the categorical imperative almost like a fact of the universe, a part of the universe, and we just use our reason and logic in order to figure out something which is outside of ourselves? Or is it completely contingent on humanity? But then just because something is contingent on humanity and universal within humanity doesn't necessarily mean that it has less meaning than if it existed outside of ourselves as well. So anyway, the categorical imperative states that, well, it has three maxims, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to remember these completely because I haven't studied Kant for a while. But the three maxims are essentially act only on that maxim of which you would will to be a universal law, treat other people as ends and never as mere means, and act as a lawmaking member in a kingdom of ends. So they're the three maxims of the categorical imperative. And Kant said that you could basically derive moral conclusions from this. So, would you want lying to be universalized? No. Therefore, you ought not to lie. So, if it violates the categorical imperative, then it's wrong. But is Kant making a logical leap in assuming that there is an almost objective moral framework? And I'm not quite sure what I mean, or Kant means by objective by that, but is he making a leap to assume that there is a moral framework that can be applied everywhere, absolutely, regardless of the situation? It's almost like, see, I don't know. Like, I don't think you can necessarily make those types of generalizations, especially about lying as well, because I'm going to actually say that lying is innate to our being, and the reason I'm going to say that is because I watched a documentary the other day on BBC iPlayer called the Honesty Experiment, and there was 3 people who had been studied by these group of, I think they were psychologists, and they ended up hooking them up with all of these different devices which would test heart rate and body sweat and movement, and would perhaps signify when someone was being dishonest or telling the truth. And it turned out that people, on average, people lie around about, I think it's 9 times a day. But that's just innate to our being. We can't necessarily avoid that. But then again, most of the lies that we do tell are for good reasons. So, for example, we might tell someone, we might go around something in a nice way rather than being completely straightforward honest, just to avoid hurting people's feelings, because we are a social species. We don't want to be socially excluded, and we want to fit in, and we don't necessarily get to fit in very easily if we're just always speaking our mind. Honestly, it's not necessarily conducive to promoting social order. And also, why would we want to assume that everything that we do think is completely true and right? Why should we go around speaking completely uncensored about everything? Maybe sometimes we do have to consider people's feelings. Like, for example, if you don't like someone's dress, don't just go up to them and say, right, I hate your dress. Like, what's even the purpose of doing that? Like Kant would probably say, if someone asks you, do you like my dress? Tell the truth. If you don't like it, say no. But then again, there's a better way to go about it. And maybe this is being slightly dishonest, but saying, look, I wouldn't wear it myself, but it looks alright on you. And maybe you can get around it that way. But Kant said you shouldn't lie. But my point is that lying just occurs all the time. It's maybe even a part of our personalities. Like, when we exaggerate about things, then that's like a form of lying, because it's bending the way that things actually are in order to portray a different way, or perhaps more interesting way of things existing. So exaggeration almost makes a more interesting, charismatic person, and perhaps we're even aware that this person might be exaggerating about the story they're telling, but we'd much rather them tell it in this sort of way than in a way that was just a little bit more monotone and boring and didn't really have any character or personality behind it. So yeah, and that's basically a conclusion I derived from the Honesty Experiment that I watched. And it just made me think of Kant when I was watching it, because he says, look, lying is always wrong. And it's like, well, okay, well, maybe Kant's making some false assumptions about the nature of morality and the nature of humanity, if those things are separate, which debatably, yes, they are. I don't know. I think, yeah. Anyway, this video, I think, has been a little bit all over the place. I started off talking about Deontic logic, which I'm still very interested by. But I don't think I've fully sorted out my thoughts on it, so I might do some more writing about it and actually try and follow the thought process right to the end, because I did start writing about it the other day, but then I got caught up on the whole objectivity subjectivity thing. So I think I'm gonna have to actually watch or read Kant and find out what he actually defined objectivity as, and then I'll be able to have a more clear judgment, or have a more honest judgment on his on his views. So yeah, I think that's all I want to say. I don't know. I do like Kant though. He's interesting. Nietzsche didn't. Nietzsche hated Kant. Nietzsche thought Kant was silly for thinking that there is an objective moral framework and that, yeah, whatever that may mean. But yeah, Nietzsche didn't like Kant, but I do. I've got a T-shirt with his face on that you've probably seen me wearing before on YouTube. I don't know what else to talk about. I think that's it. Yeah, that's it. Okay. If you've enjoyed this video, which is a little bit more academic than the last two I made, then leave a thumbs up. But it's just, I don't know, something I feel a little bit comfortable talking about in comparison to doing book reviews, which I do enjoy doing, but I'm just, I guess, a little bit less experienced with them than just general philosophy, I guess. So, yeah, thank you for watching.